Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, MR.Creepy N. So today's video is definitely going to creep you out. In this video, we're getting into true terrifying Alaska cabin horror stories. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Alright, let's get into tonight's stories. I was 13 the first time I understood that darkness isn't empty, that it holds things, that some of those things watch you back. My best friend at the time was a kid named Marcus. He was 15, a couple years older than me, but geography makes friends out of people. Our houses shared a fence line at the very end of a quiet street in a neighborhood that was mostly retired couples and older families. We were the only two kids our age for a good stretch in either direction, which meant we spent every evening together by default. No internet worth talking about back then, no reason to be inside. We were out until our legs gave out, or our parents hollered us in, whichever came first. Our go-to game was a version of hide and seek we'd made up ourselves. The seeker had to carry a flashlight the entire time, couldn't put it down, couldn't cover it. If the beam touched you, you were found. It sounds simple, but it completely changed the dynamic. The hider always knew exactly where the seeker was, could track that moving circle of light from a distance and reposition around it. The seeker, in turn, could sweep a wide beam across a large area and catch you from farther than you'd expect. It made for a genuinely interesting game. We played it almost every night. Our neighborhood backed up against a wide stretch of old forest, the kind with no maintained trails, no lighting, no real boundary you could point to on a map. Most nights we kept to the yards in the street. But sometimes, when we wanted to make things serious, we took the game into the trees. The night this happened, it was my turn to hide. Marcus and I had agreed the woods were in play. I remembered a specific feeling of wanting to make him work for it. He'd found me too fast the last 2 rounds, and it was bothering me more than it should have. So instead of hanging back near the tree line where I usually did, I went deep, further than I'd ever gone during the game. Within a few minutes, I deeply regretted that decision. The forest away from the neighborhood lights was a different world. The moon was up, but filtered through the canopy into almost nothing, just vague shapes, dark against darker. I couldn't see my own feet clearly. Every step was a guess at the ground beneath it. But I kept going, telling myself Marcus would never find me out here, that the game was as good as won. Then my foot hit something solid, and I stumbled forward onto a rotted porch step, old and abandoned, half dissolved back into the hillside, the wood so dark with age it had almost become part of the tree line around it. I stood there for a second, just looking at it. Then I thought, perfect. There was no world in which Marcus would find me in there. I went inside. The interior was gutted, debris on the floor, the smell of rot and old damp, the specific silence of a space that hasn't held a person in years. I felt my way to a staircase, went up slowly with one hand on the wall, and found a single room at the top with a window that faced back toward the neighborhood. I settled in beneath the window ledge, back against the wall, and waited. I sat there long enough that my eyes adjusted and the wait became almost boring. Then I saw him, a silhouette moving through the trees below, coming toward the cabin. No flashlight, which meant Marcus was cheating, covering the beam or turning it off entirely to move without giving himself away. I almost laughed. Typical. I watched him work his way slowly through the undergrowth, the dark shape of him getting closer, the soft crunch of leaves marking every step. He reached the base of the cabin and moved out of my sight line beneath the window, but I could still hear the footsteps, now on the ground floor, moving around, then finding the staircase, and then my eye caught something that turned my whole body cold. Far off in the trees, moving along a completely different path, was the flashlight, that wide, bobbing circle of light that meant Marcus was still out there, still searching, still playing the game, still nowhere near the cabin. The footsteps on the stairs continued upward. I didn't think. I dropped to the floor and pressed myself under the old bed frame in the corner, flat on my stomach, face turned toward the doorway. My heart was so loud in my ears, I was sure whatever was on those stairs could hear it. The footsteps reached the top. A click, mechanical and clean. A sound I was 13 years old and had never heard in person before, but recognized the same way you recognize something you've been warned about. My whole body went rigid. Then boots appeared in the doorway. Large, heavy, caked with mud. They stopped just inside the threshold and stood there, completely still, for what felt like a full, stretched minute. Long enough that I stopped breathing. Long enough that my vision started to go dark at the edges, from the effort of staying absolutely motionless. Then they turned, slowly, and walked back out. I gave it 3 seconds. Then I came out from under the bed, crossed the room in 4 steps, and threw myself out of the window. I hit the ground wrong and stumbled, but I didn't stop. I just ran, through the dark, through the undergrowth, arms up against the branches, back the way I'd come. Behind me I could hear footsteps, heavy, fast, gaining, and I made the decision not to look back because looking back would slow me down, and slowing down was something I could not afford. Then I saw Marcus's flashlight ahead, sweeping through the trees. He caught me in the beam and immediately called out, "Got you, I can see you, I win the round," in that satisfied voice he always used. But I didn't stop. I kept running straight at him, and I watched the satisfied look on his face dissolve as his eyes moved from me to the space directly behind me. Whatever he saw there, he didn't ask any questions. He just turned and ran alongside me. We hit my back door together, went inside, locked it. Both of us standing in my kitchen, breathing like we'd sprinted a mile, which we essentially had. Marcus was shaking. He looked at me and said very quietly, "Who was that man running behind you?" I still feel that sentence in my chest when I think about it. The specific chill of having what you experienced confirmed by someone else's eyes. I told him everything. The cabin, the staircase, the boots, the sound of the gun being readied in the dark. He didn't question a single detail. We went to my parents together, downplayed the whole thing as much as we could manage, just enough that they'd take it seriously without completely losing their minds. They called the police. The officers searched the cabin and the surrounding woods for most of the night. They found nothing, no person, no footprints they couldn't account for, no evidence anyone had been inside that cabin in years. Both sets of parents banned us from those woods after that. Neither Marcus nor I put up any argument. You couldn't have paid me to go back. I've thought about it for years. The shadow moving through the trees with no light of its own. The heavy boots standing in that doorway. The footsteps that chased me through the dark, and then, according to every search the police conducted, left no trace of themselves behind. I have no clean explanation. I never have. What I know is that Marcus saw it too. And the look on his face when that flashlight beam moved from me to whatever was behind me. That look said everything his words couldn't. Whatever was in those woods that night, it wasn't lost. It wasn't confused. It was exactly where it wanted to be. And for a few minutes, so was I. The snow makes everything look softer than it really is. That's one of the first things I learned in Alaska. It covers the sharp stuff, rounds the edges, lies for you. You look out at a world of white and think peaceful until you notice the one thing that doesn't belong. For me, it was a set of footprints. This was a few months ago. On my second wedding anniversary, my wife, Hannah, and I both managed to get a few days off and decided to do something that felt simple and quiet instead of expensive and loud. We live in Anchorage, and I'd always had this picture in my head of us, tucked away in some remote cabin. Snow outside, fire inside, nowhere to be. So when a friend of a friend mentioned he had a place out near the Talkeetna area, way off the road system, real Alaska as he called it, and he'd give us a discount, I jumped on it. He didn't go into a lot of detail about how isolated it was. That part I figured out when we got there. To reach the cabin, you turned off the highway onto a narrow private road that wound through the trees for what felt like forever. No street lights, just our headlights cutting through thick spruce and birch. Snow piled high on either side like frozen waves. By the time the cabin finally appeared in the beams, a small dark shape hunched under a heavy roof of snow. I realized we hadn't passed another house in a solid 15 minutes. The nearest neighbor was probably close to a mile away, maybe more. It should have bothered me more than it did. But the cabin itself, it looked like something off a postcard. Fresh snow piled on the eaves, smoke just starting to curl from a metal chimney, a wraparound porch half buried but still somehow inviting. The mountains sat behind it like a painted backdrop. For a second, I forgot to be cautious, and just felt lucky. Inside, it was warm and almost too cozy. Someone had come out beforehand and stacked wood by the stove, turned on a few lamps, made the place look like it was waiting just for us. No cell service, of course. My phone died the second we left the highway. That actually felt like part of the point. We'd wanted to get away. Now we had. The first night went exactly how we pictured it. We cooked, played some music off my laptop, then ended up curled together on the couch, watching a downloaded movie, with the fire throwing long shadows on the walls. Later, when we got too warm, Hannah reminded me about the hot tub on the back deck. If the cabin was postcard perfect, the hot tub was ridiculous. Steam drifting up into the freezing air, endless forest on all sides, a sky full of stars sharp enough to hurt if you stared too long. It felt like something from someone else's life. I went to change and realized I'd left my swim trunks in the car out front. The temperature had dropped hard since we arrived, and the snow that had fallen all day had built up into a smooth, unbroken sheet across the clearing. When I stepped off the porch and into it, the cold went straight through my socks. I was rushing, head down, focused on the car, when I saw them. Boot prints, not mine, not Hannah's. A single line of deep, fresh impressions cutting across the otherwise untouched snow. They came straight out of the tree line at the edge of the clearing, walked in the dead line to one of the living room windows, and then turned around and went straight back into the woods. No tracks to the door, no knock, just tree line, window, tree line. I stood there longer than made sense, my legs going numb, my brain trying to stitch together a reasonable narrative. Someone out for a walk, a hunter maybe, a local. Maybe they thought the cabin was empty. Maybe they got embarrassed and left. But even in that first minute, a couple things were wrong. We hadn't heard a car. The access road was narrow enough that you could hear a vehicle from inside with the stove going, easy, and whoever had come didn't go to the door. They went only to the window, close enough to look in. I went back inside and told Hannah. She didn't take it as lightly as I tried to. I could see it hit her all at once. The isolation, the dead phones, the single road, the fact that we didn't know a single face within a 30-minute drive. She tried to play it cool, but she kept glancing at that window. We decided to drive back out to the nearest town, where we knew our phones would work, and message the cabin owner. It felt a bit dramatic, but doing nothing felt worse. We got a couple bars of service in a gas station parking lot about 20 minutes down the road. I texted the owner, explaining what I'd seen and asking if he had any friends or workers who might have stopped by. Maybe he'd sent someone to check on the place and just forgotten to mention it. We waited in the car for half an hour. No answer. It was late, and I told myself he was probably asleep. We could have called, but sitting there in that lot, under flickering fluorescent lights, the whole thing started to feel like we were making too big a deal out of it. People around here walked in the woods. Boots and snow happened. We drove back to the cabin. Neither of us mentioned the hot tub. We went straight to bed instead, both more tired than we wanted to admit. Whatever nerves we had got smothered under the weight of the day, and at some point, I drifted off. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. I'm a heavy sleeper normally, the kind you can shake awake, and they'll talk without remembering. But this time, I was alert instantly, like someone had flipped the switch. The room was dim. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. Hannah was asleep beside me, breathing slow. Then I heard it again, a soft bump against the bedroom window. The curtains were closed, so there was nothing to see, and the first thing my brain gave me was snow. Maybe a chunk had slid off the roof, hit the glass. I lay there listening, waiting for my heart to slow enough that I could fall back asleep. Another bump, slightly harder. I got out of bed, trying not to wake Hannah, and walked over to the window. For a second I just stood there, fingers on the curtain, telling myself that if I checked and saw nothing, this would all dissolve into something I laughed about later. I opened the curtains. On the other side of the glass, there was only darkness. My reflection, a faint smear of trees. The angle of the porch roof blocked any moonlight that might have helped. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and immediately regretted it. The glare turned the glass into a white wall. I could see even less. The only way to see outside properly was to crack the window itself. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. The cold rushed in first, then the quiet. Fresh snow had fallen since we'd gone to bed, but right beneath the window, the surface was broken, a messy cluster of deep boot prints, so close to the house that whoever made them could have leaned forward and put their forehead on the glass. My stomach dropped. The prints didn't stop there. They led away from the cabin toward the tree line, each one crisp and recent. I lifted the phone slowly, following the path of boot marks with the light. That's when I saw him, a figure standing out in the open snow between the cabin and the woods, maybe 10 yards away, far enough that I couldn't see his face, but close enough that there was no mistaking the way he was facing, directly at me. No movement, no wave, no attempt to hide. Just standing there in the dark, shoulders hunched, hands at his sides. The phrase "looking at me" doesn't cover it. It felt more like he was waiting to see what I would do next. I shut the window and pulled the curtains closed in a single motion. My heart was somewhere up in my throat. For a few seconds I just stood there, listening to my own breathing. Then I woke Hannah. "We need to leave," I said. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears, too flat. "Right now. Pack your stuff." She came awake confused and already afraid, asking what happened. I dodged the question. Telling her there was a man standing in the snow outside our window at 3 in the morning didn't feel useful. Someone's out there. I don't like it. We're going back to town. She didn't argue. She just started throwing things into her bag. Within a few minutes, we had everything piled by the front door. I grabbed the keys, opened it, and we both sprinted through the snow to the car. Breathing fog, boots slipping. The cabin looked different from the outside now. Less like a postcard, more like a stage set waiting for something awful to happen. I started the engine and slammed it into reverse. That's when Hannah screamed. I followed her gaze, and my brain took a second to make sense of what I was seeing. He was there again. This time, he was standing near the corner of the cabin, closer to the road, angled toward the car. Same distance, same stillness. No rush, no chase, just watching. The porch light brushed the edge of his features enough to make out the basics: heavy coat, hat pulled low, a scarf or something covering the lower half of his face. Nothing dramatic, just a man-shaped shadow planted exactly where we had to look at him as we left. I didn't wait to make eye contact. I put my foot down and took the narrow road faster than I should have, the car fishtailing slightly in the packed snow. We didn't speak until my phone buzzed with the return of the signal. Once we had enough bars, I texted the owner everything in one long message. The boot prints by the window, earlier the bumps on the glass, the figure in the snow, the way he seemed to move around the cabin. He didn't answer until late the next morning. His reply said he'd driven out to check the place. He told us there were indeed prints in the snow, more than I'd seen, not just at the one-bedroom window or the living room window. They were all around the cabin. He said they stopped at every window, circling the building again and again. No tire tracks on the road besides ours, no obvious path back toward the highway. Reading that made my stomach twist in a way the actual night hadn't. It meant whoever had been out there hadn't just wandered by. He'd done a full loop, looked in every window he could reach, taken his time. We cut the rest of the trip short and stayed home. It felt ridiculous at first, sitting on our own couch with the TV on and the heat humming, jumping at every car that passed the window. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't also feel like coming up for air. We never found out who he was. The owner didn't either, as far as he told us. No follow-up from the police. No news story. Just boot prints in the snow around a remote cabin, stopping at every pane of glass where a person might be sleeping, and a figure who didn't bother to hide the fact that he was there. Sometimes now, when I see fresh snow outside my own house, My eyes go straight to the edges, to the windows, the corners, the places where prints would start or end. I tell myself it was just some local creep, someone bored, someone drunk, someone weird, with the look of him standing there, not coming closer, not calling out, not asking for help, just watching us leave like he'd been rehearsing that exact moment all night. That's what I can't shake. I don't usually talk about this, not because I think people won't believe me. I stopped worrying about that a long time ago. I don't talk about it because every time I try to explain what happened, the words come out wrong, too neat, too small, like trying to describe a drowning by talking about water. But here it is. I rented a cabin in the Alaskan interior for a long weekend last October. Just me. I'd been burning through myself for months, the kind of tired that a good night's sleep doesn't touch, and I needed somewhere that had absolutely no memory of me. I found a listing for a small rental off a dirt road deep in the Susitna Valley, outside of Talkeetna. The description mentioned that cell service ended a few miles before the property. That detail was the reason I booked it. I grew up in a small town. I knew dark. I knew woods. I thought I understood what alone felt like. I had no idea. The cabin was old in a way that felt honest. Dark spruce logs, a porch that gave slightly underfoot, windows with glass so old it had a faint ripple to it. It sat low, in a clearing ringed on every side by dense black spruce, the kind that grow so close together they eat the afternoon light by 3 o'clock. Inside, someone had left a cord of split birch stacked beside the wood stove and a handwritten note on the kitchen table. Welcome. Don't leave food unsecured. Enjoy the silence. I remember thinking that last line was a nice touch. I got the fire going, made a simple dinner, and sat on the porch, watching the mountains go dark in the distance. One of those evenings you hold on to. My whole body finally exhaled. I went to bed early, genuinely tired in that clean way you only get from fresh air and real stillness. And I thought, this is exactly what I needed, but I didn't sleep well. There was no specific sound I could point to. It was more like a feeling, a low, pressing wrongness that sat behind my sternum and didn't respond to logic. I lay there listening to the wind in the spruce, and beneath it, at the very edge of my hearing, there were other sounds. Footsteps on the porch, slow and spaced, with a patience to them that didn't feel animal. I got up and checked the lock twice, told myself it was a moose or the structure settling in the cold, and got back into bed. The feeling didn't leave. It just went quiet, like something that had decided to wait. The second night woke me up hard. No loud sound. I came up out of sleep the way your body does when something below the level of hearing has already made the decision for you. The cabin was dark. The stove had burned low, and along the exterior wall beside the window, something was dragging slowly. One long, deliberate stroke across the logs. A pause, then the same stroke again from the beginning. Not frantic, not like an animal startled in the dark. Methodical, like something making sure I was awake. I grabbed my flashlight, laced my boots, and went outside before I'd thought it through. The clearing was completely still, no wind. The spruce stood frozen and silent in the way they get in deep cold, every branch locked in place. I swept the beam slowly across the tree line. Nothing. I was already turning back to the door when the light caught them. 2 points of amber, low and level, deep in the trees, maybe 50 feet back from the clearing edge, perfectly still, perfectly patient, watching me the way things watch when they have no reason to be afraid. I froze. Not a choice. My body made that call before my brain could. The eyes blinked once, then the darkness closed over them like a curtain being drawn, and they were simply gone. I backed inside, locked the door, pushed the kitchen table against it, and sat in the chair by the dying stove with the hatchet from the wood pile across my knees. I did not sleep. I watched the door until gray morning light started coming through the curtains. I told myself it was an animal. Some reasonable part of me even managed to believe it until I went for a hike. The trail east of the cabin followed a frozen creek through the spruce before opening onto a wide bench with views of the range. I started out deliberately easy, slow pace, cold air, focusing on the crunch of frozen ground underfoot. I was going to enjoy this trip if it killed me. About 20 minutes in, the feeling came back, that same low interior frequency from the first night. The space behind me felt occupied. I turned around twice and saw nothing but empty trail. But the feeling grew the farther I went, not fading the way paranoia usually does when it finds nothing to feed on. It got heavier, more specific, like something back there was narrowing the distance without rushing. I turned around and walked back faster than I'd left. When I stepped onto the porch, I stopped. Just to the left of the door, in front of the mat, was a mound of freshly turned earth, small and compact and dark against the frost-hardened ground around it. It had not been there when I left. I had stepped over that exact spot 40 minutes ago. I stood there staring at it for a long time. Then I went inside and didn't go back out until morning. The third night it came to the glass. It started as tapping, soft, at the first window, almost polite, then silence, then tapping at the next window over. It moved around the full perimeter of the cabin in a slow, unhurried circuit, checking each pane one at a time, as if running through a list. The footsteps returned on the porch underneath the tapping, heavy and slow, with too much space between each step, a stride that didn't fit any body I'd seen. Then the scratching started at the door itself. I was standing in the center of the room by then, back against the wood stove, hatchet in one hand, flashlight in the other, not thinking, just present. I looked at the window and it was there. I don't have clean language for what I saw. It was tall, wrongly tall, the kind of tall that looks like something has been stretched past its original shape, thinned and elongated until the silhouette barely holds together. The outline at its edges shifted without it moving, like heat shimmer in frozen air, and the face pressed close enough to the glass that the surface fogged faintly, which means it breathed, which means it had lungs, which means it was wearing a body of some kind. The amber eyes were the same ones from the tree line. The old people of this land, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Innu, the Dene, have carried this thing's name across generations with a very specific kind of care. They describe it as something the deep winter makes, something that was once a person, lost, starving, isolated, that the cold hollowed out and refilled with hunger. They say it grows with every meal, taller and thinner and more ravenous, walking the northern forests forever in a body that no longer fits, always eating, never finished. I looked at that window, and I believed every single word of it. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for the fire to die down to coals, long enough for my hands to stop shaking and go numb instead. Then it was gone. The sounds reversed, scratching, then footsteps, then tapping, and then just silence, the kind that feels less like an absence and more like something holding its breath. I was in the car before sunrise. I drove the forest road with both hands tight on the wheel, and the radio bleeding static and the heater running full, and I didn't exhale properly until the highway appeared and my phone lit up with a returning signal. I pulled over and sat there for a while, doing nothing. I've turned this over 100 times since that weekend. The mound of earth by the door, what it was, what it marked, whether it was meant for the thing or for me. The way those eyes in the trees had watched without any fear at all, only a flat, patient certainty that reminded me of a door that knows it will eventually be opened. The breath fogging the glass. That detail I keep coming back to. Whatever was wearing that shape, it had once been something warm. My grandmother used to say an old name quietly. Eyes down, the way you mentioned something listens for itself being spoken. She said, don't say it hungry. She meant don't call it when you empty inside, because that's the frequency it finds easiest to locate. I was exhausted when I booked that cabin, running on nothing, hollow in the way that months of grinding make you hollow. I think about that more than I should.